This is On the Other Hand, a podcast sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas that explores politics and other issues of importance to Arkansans. And we do that through having conversations with community leaders. So stay with us as we talk to another leader in Arkansas who works across differences to get things done and to bring us closer together. Hello and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, April Chatham Carpenter, here today, and I'm here with my co-host, Glenn White. On our podcast, Glenn and I interview community leaders in Arkansas who help work towards solutions across various political and other divides, or who in other ways reach across various divisions within our community. And Glenn, we have an exciting guest on today, so tell us who we have.
Yeah, April, we've got a really good speaker. I'm really happy to have him, Dr. Jay Barth. Many of you will probably know about Jay. He's a native of Arkansas. He has a PhD in political science. He currently serves as the Emeritus Professor of Politics at Hendrix College, which is where he taught for about 26 years, I believe. Jay has earned numerous awards for his work in education and politics over the years, so I won't bother going into all those. I won't even know them all. There's so many. Currently, he serves as director of the Clinton Presidential Library. He also serves on the board of Central Arkansas Water. So we thought it would be a good idea to have Jay come in and tell us today about his work with the Clinton Presidential Center, what they do there, and what keeps him busy in his role as the library director. So, Jay, welcome to On the Other Hand.
Good to see you.
Well, it's good to have you here. Let's start off. For those of you who may not be familiar with what you do, tell us a little bit about the Clinton Presidential Center and Library and School and your role in all of that.
Yeah, so the Clinton Presidential Center is composed of three different institutions that all live on the same campus. That's the Clinton School of Public Service, which of course is the University of Arkansas campus, a master's only program. Then there are the Little Rock offices of the Clinton Foundation. And then finally, there is the Clinton Library and Museum. And the Clinton Presidential Library and Museum is the part of the turf that is directed by me. It is an enclave of the National Archives and Records Administration. And so it is a federal outpost where our primary duty is, of course, to preserve and protect the materials and records of the Clinton administration, but to also tell the story of that administration to a broader community, to put it in historical context, and then, of course, to use that as a jumping off point for a variety of other education opportunities to help folks gain a deeper understanding of civics and how their own skills and talents can make a difference in our American democracy.
And the Clinton School of Public Service is considerably distinct from the others, I understand. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so the Clinton School of Public Service, which is now nearing its second decade, the end of its second decade, is a master's only school. It has been, has a distinctive curriculum that really focuses on a combination of classroom work, but also field work, where students working in groups and as individuals work on social and political change projects across varied sectors, whether it's the nonprofit, the governmental, or the for-profit sector. In recent years, they have also added an online courses of study as well. And so it is a program that is very much alive and well. I was an inaugural faculty member at that program at its origins. Dean Vicky DeFrancesco Soto is the dean of the Clinton School now.
I seem to recall, Jay, that the Clinton School of Public Service, when it first started, was kind of a unique thing that there was no other program like it in the country. Is that the case, and is it still the case?
It was the first. There are a handful of other campuses now, schools that have developed Masters of Public Service programs. I know of at least two or three out there, but it is still very distinctive. And I think that what it does particularly well is that the field service component to really connect the classroom to the real world. And I think that it is particularly potent in how it does that and how that really really defines the entire experience at the Clinton School.
And that's where you get the students out at some point in their education to actually be in the real world in organizations, businesses, and things like that, where they get the real world experience, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, it's good to know that it's a pioneer and that it's inspired some other places to start doing the same thing. We could certainly use some people who are well trained and thoughtful about the role they play in public service. So thanks to President Clinton.
Yeah, and I think it very much focuses on working across lines of difference to create pragmatic, positive change, and that's obviously very much a hallmark of the Clinton administration and Bill Clinton's career, to try to work across those lines of difference for the public good.
And that fits really well with what we do with Braver Angels, as you know. That's what we do with the podcast too, is try to talk to people who in some way are able to work across lines of division, because things go better when we do that. So now that we've got that kind of figured out a little bit, let's back up a bit. I want to know about you more personally. What are some of the things that in your early life, you tell us a little bit about that and how that developed into your interest in what you've done for your career and the political perspective as well.
Yeah, so I grew up in Saline County, just south of Little Rock. My grandfather was part of the bauxite industry, which was the industry there that, of course, pulled that ore out of the earth and then, of course, transferred it into aluminum. And so that industry really defined Saline County during my coming of age years, and my own family. It was obviously very, very important to them. But just as important for my family, especially my grandparents, was engagement in public service, and it was mostly at the community level. My grandfather was one of the originators of the water commission in Bryant. He helped to build the water supply in Bryant. My grandmother was very involved with Parks and Recreation, so she was on the Parks Commission. So they were very involved at the city level. They also engaged in party politics. And so I really kind of grew up in an atmosphere where public service in a lot of different forms was just kind of normalized. There wasn't a week there wasn't a week that went by where there weren't at least one or two or three public meetings that were part of my family's agenda for the week. So that was very important. I was my parents separated pretty soon after I was born, and so I was born as an only child to a single mom. So my maternal grandparents were very important in terms of my kind of coming of age and helping to raise me. I really did fall in love with politics pretty early on. I was fascinated by the psychology of politics, what really moved folks politically, why passions emerged in politics, either more positive passions or more negative passions. I was very, very interested in that. Of course, Arkansas politics during the 1970s, when I'm coming of age, was a very vibrant period with some real superstar politicians on in the arena, and so I was really seeing politics play out, and it was a very very interesting time in that regard. So I started volunteering on campaigns myself when I was maybe about 12 or 13. I think I started. I was around politics earlier, but 12 or 13 is probably the first time I really started going out and committing to volunteering for candidates, and that became part of my life as well. When I was interested in a lot of other things academically. I was I had some interest in math and physics. I was interested in a variety of things. But when I got to college, I kind of came back to the study of politics. Although I was interested in putting it in some historical context, because I think if we detach the study of politics from history, we're missing a lot. I also was really interested in interdisciplinary studies generally, because I think that too often we study one subject and disconnect it from the broader array of subjects that are going on. So I became really, as an undergrad, an interdisciplinary student. I was an American Studies major at Hendrix, where I went as an undergrad. And as I kind of went on with my time at Hendrix, I knew I wanted to stay in school. I knew after
You liked being a
college,
student, huh?
I was at home in that sector. I also knew I didn't want to be a lawyer, or thought I didn't want to be a lawyer. Later, that probably changed. I probably regret that I didn't go to law school at some point, and, a little bit later on, because I think the courts are a really powerful source for change. But I decided I did want to go to graduate school. I was a little pulled in different directions about whether I wanted to be a history student or whether I wanted to be a political scientist, and kind of somewhat haphazardly ended up at the University of North Carolina in political science, and really went to study the politics of the South and to understand more deeply how this region developed politically, and how some of those passions that I talked about earlier played out in the South and creating change in the South politically. When I was an undergrad at Hendrix, I also did get pretty deeply involved in a lot of campus politics. I was student body president. I was involved in some of that stuff. I was not. I'm very shy as a person, so I'm not a super outgoing person. I'm a little hesitant to put myself out there in that way, but at a small campus, I found a place where I could engage and in that way, and so that was very important to me. I then went to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, for grad school, and really, didn't love it. I had some challenges in grad school, kind of finding my home. At one point, I almost did think about going to law school, but I stuck with it, mainly because when I got in the classroom and started teaching my own courses, I really found my home, and that was the place where I was really kind of born to be. Teaching really did become my calling in a lot of ways. I could communicate. I found I could communicate material effectively, inspire students, get them fired up about how their own skills and talents connected with the political world, and that's really where I found my home, and that was crucial because it helped me get through my program, because I now had a prize that I could put my eye on, and that was a teaching job. And so I worked through the PhD program, and then it was a total accident that I ended up back in Arkansas. I had figured out that I wanted to teach at a liberal arts institution, because that's really the kind of place I wanted to be, and Hendrix was the kind of place I wanted to be. I did not expect to be at Hendrix, and it was kind of an accident. I was not looking to come home at that point. Felt like I needed to live some different places. During graduate school, I had discovered my sexuality, and coming home to Arkansas in the 1990s felt a little scary. And as a gay man, but it was a job, as my mom said, and I had to take the job. And so I came home, not knowing how long I would stay, and I'm still here after 26 years at Hendrix, and some cool opportunities since then.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of people are happy that you are here. One thing that we asked several people, and I don't know why I neglected to ask this, but if you're willing to answer, your political leaning. We talk about red on the conservative side, blue on the liberal side, and all sorts of shades in between. Tell us briefly kind of where you lie on that spectrum.
You know, I, I grew up in a progressive family. I grew up in a family that was deeply committed to equality. You know, whether it was economic equality or social equality, that was kind of the undermining, undergirding value of my family. And so I think I would call myself an egalitarian. And that, of course, puts me, I see government as having a place in ensuring that equality shows itself, whether it is in the area, the realm of our economic lives or our social lives. I think those things are often pretty intertwined, and that's where I personally come down. Um, I, um, I do think that it is really important that there be the ability to communicate across lines of difference. So I would add to my own personal um, worldview, which is, I think, pretty deep and has been fairly unwavering across most of my life. Um, you know, I combine that with that a real sense that in the American democratic experiment, it is vitally important that we are able to communicate across these lines of difference. That's the only way this democracy is gonna work. We need to agree disagreeably. We need to have good debates. We need to compromise, and we need to achieve pragmatic ways of moving forward while people still hold firm to their own beliefs.
I appreciate that. And you kind of answered my last question about values. You sprinkle several of those in there that you grew up with and how that got you to where you are. So I appreciate that.
You know, Jay, I always love it when I see professors, whether they are former or current, being in the community and making a difference and actually being able to walk out their values and model that for students. And that's in some ways what you're doing probably with the Clinton Presidential Center, and as well as your work on the Central Arkansas Board, is being more that kind of pracademic, a term that I have started using to talk about practical applications of academic work. And so when we're thinking about your specific work with the Clinton Presidential Library and Center, I'd love to hear about some examples in which you see that center, the library, facilitating that collaboration across the ideological lines. So what can you tell us as an example of that?
Yeah, I think there's several ways. I mean, I think that first off, I do think it's crucially important that kids really come to understand the basic underpinnings of this American democracy. You know, the fundamental structures of government, the way in which the branches work together, all those kinds of things, and importantly, the documents in which those kind of structures were created. And I think that there can be, you know, it's important that there be kind of a shared understanding of that, no matter what one's beliefs on what those branches of government should do with that power, but an understanding of some of the structures. Because I think if you have that shared understanding at the start, then you can have a more valuable conversation moving forward. And that's a real core tenet of what we do, is really do high quality civics education. We do that for students with a variety of in-person and virtual programming. We do that, of course, with the tours of our young people who come to the Clinton Library. We very much build those lessons in. We And so that's one thing. The second thing is definitely in our public programming, is that we know that folks of all ages need to understand the world more broadly, think about issues they've not thought about before, hear perspectives they don't hear in their daily lives, and that's certainly a key component of our work is that ongoing public programming. And then we're really increasingly putting a lot of emphasis on lifelong learning as well. We here at the Clinton Library, there's just a tremendous amount of talent in our archival staff, our museum staff, and more and more of those folks are getting out into the community, taking their skills and talents out, whether it's to LifeQuest, which is an elder education program here in Central Arkansas that's very vibrant. We're teaching there. We're doing work to prepare green card holders to take the naturalization exam. That's a really important piece of our work now. So those are examples of the kinds of things that we are doing. And so we are very much a nonpartisan institution. That doesn't mean that we don't talk about the way in which division and disagreements play out within a system. And we certainly don't foil folks' own tenets and beliefs and values as they come into that system, but we really put our emphasis on helping folks understand the system and begin to think about how their own skills and talents, values, and interests kind of play out in that system.
That makes sense. Civics education, it's by itself, by its nature, should be nonpartisan because it shows how our branches of government and structures all work together in this republic that we have. I'm curious. You made a comment early on that I wondered about. You said that President Clinton, when in his presidency, worked across lines of difference to create change for the public good. I may not have quoted that exactly how you said it, but I wrote it down because I thought it was significant. And I'm curious, as a political scientist and someone that works at the Clinton Library, how you see what he did in his administration perhaps being a model for what we can aim towards in our current climate of presidential politics. Without calling on necessarily any of the two candidates that are running for president, I think there are some examples of things that he did to work across the divide that could bring hope if we could see them again. And I'm curious what you think those things are.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see from the 1990s, there were, it was a divided government much of that time. And some of that division was fairly combative with the rise of Speaker Gingrich and others during that period. And out of that, there were some compromises that emerged that nobody loved. Folks had certainly deep disagreements about them, whether it's the crime bill, whether it's the welfare reform legislation of that era, whether it's some of the economic decisions of that era. But there certainly was change that resulted from that. Whether it's the earned income tax credit, whether it's some of the measures that created, in the eyes of many, enhanced public safety related to some limited gun legislation, on healthcare, even though the major healthcare reform efforts of the administration failed, there was a certain resilience that showed itself, and we saw soon thereafter the child health, the CHIP program, which expanded children's health insurance, that became an important part of the legislation moving forward. And I think that's a word that we kind of don't think about enough, is resilience. Is that these ideas that are played out, or people fight for, they don't go away. I mean, they kind of come back. And I think an American democracy is pretty healthy when there is that resilience of ideas, whether it's healthcare reform, which of course, plays out over time. And I would argue that, at the end of the day, we probably end up with better legislation in which there is a bit more consensus when there is this kind of a little bit longer debate. I think we certainly have seen some, shorter debates in moments of crisis, but we often have to come back and then do some improvement later on, because we know that it wasn't perfect in the that immediate kind of crisis response was not perfect, and we have to come back and tinker with things pretty significantly. For instance, in the aftermath of 9/11, we saw some pretty significant legislation to allow um, investigations into communications that might involve terrorist planning. We know we've had to scale that back, tighten it up, so that we are balancing more fully American civil liberties with the need for national security. In the moment, we responded appropriately. I mean, there was a need to respond, but we also know that there is this need to kind of for a longer debate, and resilience is at the heart of some of that ongoing debate. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that there is something valuable there. And I do think that healthcare reform story is really interesting in the Clinton era, and that we have a lot of kids, including kids in this state of Arkansas, who got healthcare coverage out of those efforts, even though the initial big healthcare reform package failed. And to the credit of that was a bipartisan measure at the state level. I mean, Governor Huckabee was very involved in very successful expansion of healthcare coverage for children in Arkansas, and Arkansas really became a model of how to do healthcare reform for kids in response to that federal program.
And you think I think you mentioned a number of other things, but one of the things that President Clinton did that reached across the aisle, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to recall him saying something, ending welfare as we know it. There was the compromise with people on the Republican side. Would you include that as well?
Yeah, and that was certainly an area where there was again, neither side loved it, but both sides got something out of the process. Yeah, some people it was so contrary to their values that they felt like they needed to speak out. Some people left the administration as a result of that. That's appropriate. If you think your values have really been completely undermined by the ultimate piece of legislation, that's certainly appropriate. And you move outside the system to fight from outside, because we know in this American democracy there are lots of points of entry in terms of trying to create change.
So that's at the national and federal level, and you even mentioned, Mike Huckabee working on that at the state level. I'm imagining that the kind of coalition building and resilience that you're talking about is also important at the local level. You serve on the board of the Central Arkansas Water System. I don't know if they ever have conflicts or decisions that they have to make that have to reach compromise level or other kinds of things. You also mentioned earlier that I think it was your grandmother or grandfather that also served on a similar or in the water kind of area. So what do you do as a part of that board? Curious, have you seen the need for collaborating across differences there as well?
Yeah, I mean, we of course manage the water system. It is a really healthy water system. We're really, I think, proud of the water system here in the Central Arkansas area. It provides really good, high quality water. There's been over time a real effort to protect the watershed around our primary water supply. And that's been very effective. But as always, of course, there are some places where there's some compromise. A good example, we just last year did a 10-year rate um, um, increase. And that was very important to build out some pretty large capital expenditures, including redoing the largest treatment plant that we have for the long term. And obviously that we've seen some other cities that have let their infrastructure related to water kind of age has created some real challenges for those cities. And if a place loses its water supply, even for a short term, it's devastating to that community. But in doing that, we certainly had to balance some things. There were debates about, how much should that rate, the rates be reflective of equity and trying to promote and protect equity versus being sure that we maximize the bang out of that in terms of the amount of money resources that we could get to pump back into those projects. There were compromises about which projects were in, which ones were not, because we had to make choices all over the place. And so, any governmental body at any level of any size is going to be engaged in that kind of work. I do think that sometimes, and there are values in those debates. I do think that it's often a little bit easier at the local level with those kind of targeted bodies that work, for instance, on utilities, where you can kind of the debate is a little bit more contained. And yes, there are going to be disagreements about economic development versus environmental protection, et cetera. But but at least it's a little bit contained conversation. And moreover, I do think that because the members of those bodies sit with each other regularly in a very often in pretty tight setting, physically they're pretty close together. I do think it leads to a recognition of folks' humanity, even if there's disagreement. I was on the State Board of Education for 7 years here in Arkansas, and that was at a time that there was a lot of contentiousness around education, including the takeover of the Little Rock school districts, for instance. And there was a lot of deep disagreement. I mean, the ultimate vote to take over the district was a 4-3 vote. But there was, and I disagreed with my colleagues who voted the other way, but they were friends. I had deep respect for them. I had, good personal rapport with them. There were other areas where we really agreed a lot, For instance, one of my colleagues on the state board, she and I disagreed on a lot of things. We really did. But we had a lot of consensus around how we treat special needs students. And we actually agreed, pretty much 100% on that. So you can always, I think that's what's nice in some of those smaller bodies is it, even if there's some disagreements, they don't become deep factional divides. They don't become chasms because you can find some other places where you can build some bridges, even if you have disagreement about certain issues. I think at the federal level, it's more complicated to do that because you don't have the same kind of ongoing personal interaction. The bodies are bigger. It's easier to caricature folks on the other side. And moreover, while there are certainly a lot of pieces of legislation at the federal level that are bipartisan, and we don't see a lot of attention on those, on a lot of legislation, there is division and folks are really in their camps and it's really hard to come across those lines. And so, it's almost like the Grand Canyon where you have issue after issue that is water running through that canyon and it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And the places to get across that divide just don't exist. I think at the local level, that's just much less the case.
So in some ways, if people are cynical about politics, perhaps they could get involved at the local level and see how building relationships actually does make a difference and helping us humanize the other side and see that we do have a lot of things in common.
Well, that's it. That's the first part of our conversation with Jay Barth. We do have a lot more that we talked about, so we'll get to that second part of our conversation with Jay shortly in the next episode. So I hope you'll join us for that one as well. I will tell you that in terms of the first episode, what we've covered so far, there were a couple of highlights for me. One was how the Clinton School and Library seeks to bring people together and cross divides, and that he feels that that was consistent with what Clinton did during his administration. Another thing I found of interest was his discussion of the concept of resilience. And part of that, I gathered, means we need to keep working on our relationships across the divide and maintain our ideas about how things work, even when it doesn't succeed the first time, because as things proceed, they may work out later on. So some interesting stuff Jay had to say. We'll look forward to hearing more of what he had to say in the second episode.
Thank you all for joining us on today's edition of On the Other Hand. This was the first part of our conversation with Jay Barth. And be sure to check out the second part of this conversation with Jay, as well as other podcast episodes of On the Other Hand. You can find us on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website, and that's at arkansas.braverangels.org, or you can find us on many popular podcast sites.
And when you do visit our website, which we hope you'll do, you'll find links to all our episodes. You'll also find a link to email us at otherhandar@gmail.com so that you can send us program feedback or make suggestions for speakers or topics. One previous interview that we suggest you check out is our conversation with Kathy Webb, who is a Little Rock Board of Director member and the Vice Mayor here in Little Rock. She's also a past legislator in Arkansas. You can find that conversation in episodes 44 and 45.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, Glenn White
and April Chatham Carpenter.
Let's each do our part to bring our community closer together.